Greetings, Ruslan Belov is with you once again, presenting another daily review of the military situation on the Ukrainian theatre of operations. Well, our yesterday's predictions have been confirmed. All of Zelensky's statements about readiness to organize elections and a referendum on the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the Donetsk region come down to a single condition: the cessation of Russian military operations. Moreover, we're not talking about a couple of days for voting, but about a complete suspension for the entire preparatory period for elections lasting 2 or 3 months. Let's be frank, counting on such a thing is naive. Military operations continue, and we continue to analyze the development of events. So, colleagues, in the previous episode, I promised to examine in detail the opportunities that have emerged for the Russian armed forces after the most significant achievement of the current year. We're talking, of course, about the capture of Seversk. This is indeed the most resonant victory, considering that the operation was carried out exemplarily, with surgical precision and swiftly. Let me remind you, the settlement was taken in just 26 days, and Russian troops have already continued their movement westward. Today we will analyze further plans, directions of advance, upcoming difficulties, justified and unjustified expectations. But more on all of this later, although I understand that right now the main interest is the situation in Kupiansk. Yesterday, Zelensky arrived at the stele with the inscription Kupansk, captured himself not just in photos, but even on video. The Ukrainian General Staff, together with mapping platforms like Deep State, announced a major success, allegedly drove out Russian forces from several settlements and established control over practically the entire right bank part of Kupiansk. Let's start with this. Let's figure out what corresponds to reality, what doesn't, what the actual situation is, and what the prospects are. And then we'll move on to discussing Seversk. So yesterday, Ukrainian forces announced a large-scale success. However, there's a significant point. Not a single video confirmation of objective control was presented that would support the claims of the Ukrainian General Staff and the mapping resource Deep State. What exactly did they claim this time? From the Ukrainian side came a message that the armed forces of Ukraine pushed out the Russian army from Kondrashevka, Radkivka, and Moskovka, which they call Myrnohrad. Additionally, it was reported about pushing back the Russian army in the northwestern part of Kupyansk, that is, the right bank part. As for the northern part of the settlement, I covered this information in yesterday's episode, and even before the Ukrainian announcements. Yes, pushing back did indeed occur. There are video materials confirming this. There are no questions here. But everything else raises doubts. Not a single video confirmation was provided. Not a single evidence of objective control of the presence of Ukrainian military in Kondrashevka, Radkivka, or Moskovka. You know, if we apply such an approach to the statements of the Russian Ministry of Defense that without video confirmations the territory isn't marked and a question mark is placed, then naturally the same requirements should be applied to the opposite side. No video materials, only statements. Sorry, but this is not accepted. Therefore, the previous mark remains on the map. If data appears confirming or refuting Ukrainian claims, I will immediately report this. What's really happening there? Based on the information I have, I can say the following. Drapati was given the task. He was, by the way, transferred here and appointed in charge to refute Gerasimov's report to Putin about full control of the RF armed forces over the city of Kupiansk. How to refute this? Naturally, either recapture the entire city, or at least part of it so they could pose, provide footage so Zelensky could come to the city stele of Kupiansk, take photos and declare, look, in reality, the RF armed forces are achieving nothing. This is all lies. The city of Kupiansk is under our control. But at the moment they cannot claim this directly. However, they announce clearing of Kupiansk suburbs and entry into the city. What's the situation and what forces were engaged? It's reliably known about the use of Brazilian mercenaries numbering about 300 fighters. And by the way, we've already seen video materials with their participation. I demonstrated footage of Brazilian attempts to penetrate the city center, but they are forced to hide in buildings since the sky is controlled by drones. Some of them were eliminated, the rest retreated. It's known about the engagement of approximately 300 Brazilian or Colombian fighters. In addition, Drapati removed his units from the Vovchansk sector. Is that exactly why everything collapsed there? Because by the end of November, they withdrew reserves from there, and Russian troops completed the clearing of the city, plus captured several settlements south of Vovchansk. Now the Russian army is completing the clearing of the urban-type settlement of Vilcha. In general, everything collapsed there for them, but Vovchansk doesn't interest them that much. The main goal was to recapture Kupyansk. The AFU concentrated all forces here, so they removed their units from there, transferred them to Kupansk, plus Brazilian mercenaries, and began the offensive. Indeed, they began offensive actions in the north. And as you can see, I didn't hide this information. You can check yesterday's episode. I immediately reported this. As soon as video confirmations of the actual presence of AFU fighters in the northern part of Kupiansk arrived, where Russian drone operators were striking with FPV drones, and there is this footage, it means there's no longer Russian control there, there's either a grey zone or AFU control. Since they entrenched themselves there, and Russian drone operators are striking them with FPV, this is not even a grey zone, this is AFU control. Therefore, this was immediately noted. Now they are trying to cut off the Russian army from supplies coming north of Kupiansk, and they have practically succeeded. That is, the situation is difficult, the situation is complex. At the same time, the central and southern parts of the city are still controlled by the Russian army. But again, as I said in yesterday's episode, there is a threat of blocking Russian troops. Such a threat really exists. Everything depends on how the Russian command will react and whether it will manage to transfer additional forces here or will have to retreat from the right bank part of the city. The problem is that this is the right bank of the Oskol River, and there's no reliable logistics here. There's no permanent, reliable logistics because the front line hasn't been pushed back from the river and the crossings are constantly under fire control. For the AFU, however, the situation is the opposite. They have no serious problems with pulling up reserves, equipment to this location, because the right bank is their bank, so to speak. That's the brief situation in Kupiansk. Summarizing what I've said, the situation is difficult. In the northern part of the city, the AFU indeed has progress. But regarding the suburbs they announced, there were no video confirmations of objective control, so it's still under question for now. We will closely monitor the situation. I will inform about any changes immediately, as everything will be decided in the coming days. Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhzhia direction, Huliaipole sector. Kiev failed to turn Huliaipole into a fortress. Yes, several new units were transferred there. Yes, attempts at counterattacks were made. Yes, they tried to do something. But they lasted not for long, literally 7 days. Russian troops and aviation literally drove them into the ground, into concrete, into brick, with KBs, FABs. Now the assault is going more than successfully. Russian units not only captured the eastern part of the city, but also entered and secured positions in the central part. Fighting is already underway for the high-rise buildings of the city. Huliaipole will soon be finally lost for the AFU. A huge section of territory in the south of the settlement came under Russian army control. From there we received video footage of Russian infantry clearing AFU trenches. From the front comes information from Russian fighters that things are very bad with infantry for the AFU. Many well-fortified trenches are simply abandoned by Ukrainian infantry, and there's no one to occupy them. Precisely for this reason, the front has shifted so much in recent months. Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad direction. Here the RF armed forces are generally finishing off the AFU grouping in Myrnohrad. It's already divided into several parts. In the eastern part of the city, several units are blocked that haven't surrendered yet. Meanwhile, the central part of the city has already completely come under Russian control, and the Russian army is storming the Centralnaya mine. Moreover, the assault on the mine buildings is being conducted from 2 directions, as previously assumed from the northeastern and southern directions. And partially the Centralnaya mine is already under control. After the capture of the mine, the Myrnohrad grouping will be neutralized in 1 to 2 days, especially since the clearing of the neighborhood southwest of the Centralnaya mine has already essentially been completed. Active offensive operations also continue in Hryshine. There are also further successes there, but Kiev is still fiercely resisting here. Nevertheless, everything will be finished here soon, especially when the Russian units that stormed Myrnohrad are freed up and accordingly will be transferred to other sectors of the front. For Kyiv, both in the area of Hryshine and in the area of Rodinske. And not only there, the situation will rapidly deteriorate, reports the Observer. Also yesterday, video footage was received of another batch of Ukrainian soldiers surrendering. There's a large number of Ukrainian soldiers present, and we will now be receiving such footage regularly. Sloviansk, Kramatorsk direction. At Seversk, Kyiv has a catastrophe developing faster than expected. Russian units completely captured Zvanivka the day before. Fighting has also begun for Sviatopokrovsky, and successful offensive is developing in the area of Platonivka, Yampil. Yampil was captured by the RF armed forces the day before, although pockets of resistance still remain there. If the Russian army captures the heights south of Zakitne, then the AFU will face a very difficult situation. The heights are dominant, thus Russian units will be able to get a convenient position for drone operator work, and the AFU logistics to Seversk will finally collapse, and then the front will move forward towards Sloviansk. The goal of the Russian army here is to straighten the front in the north of the Donetsk region, and in the south, thereby approach the outskirts of Sloviansk from the eastern side. From the Lyman direction, the Russian army will bypass Sloviansk from the north. That's all I have on the front situation. Now let's look at what's happening on the political arena. Vladimir Putin warned that attacks on tankers would be followed by a response, a strike on Ukraine's shadow energy infrastructure. A Turkish ship with generators from the Aksa company was hit by a missile in Odessa. A ballistic missile hit the Turkish company's ship with a cargo of generators in containers. An obvious response to attacks on tankers heading to Russia for oil, writes Podolyaka. In response, a complete blockade of ports and destruction of all cargo ships that enter there and supply Kyiv, including with military cargo, as well as those that become carriers of their drones. First, an explosion occurred on the ship, after which a fire started. On board were diesel, gasoline, gas generators. Presumably they were used for generation and distribution of electricity to areas adjacent to the port. The ship was supposed to go to Romania, but somehow ended up in Odessa. Donald Trump stated that the peace plan suited everyone in Ukraine except the illegitimate comedian Zelensky. I thought we were close to concluding an agreement with Russia. I thought we were close to concluding an agreement with Ukraine. Essentially, everyone except Zelensky liked the very concept of this agreement. You know, we presented one idea. It's an agreement of 4 parts, right? Well, there are 4 or 5 different parts. You know, it's a bit complex because you're dividing territory in a certain way. It's not the easiest thing to settle. Like a complex real estate deal multiplied by 1,000, right? But it would be an agreement that would stop the death of thousands of lives each month. Tens of thousands of lives, mostly soldiers. But as you know, there are also civilian casualties. And Ursula von der Leyen lashed out at Trump. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stated that Donald Trump should not interfere in European democracy, reports Politico. It's not for us, when it comes to elections, to determine who will be the leader of a country. This is determined by the citizens of that country. This is the sovereignty of voters. It must be protected, said von der Leyen. No one else has the right to interfere. This is unambiguous, she added, answering a question about the US national security strategy published last week that caused outrage in Europe. The document claims that Europe faces the threat of civilizational extinction in the next 20 years. The strategy also criticizes attempts to contain far-right forces in the EU, calling it political censorship, and speaks of the need to cultivate resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations. Von der Leyen stated that the EU in response initiated the creation of a democracy shield, a tool to strengthen the fight against foreign interference online, particularly in elections. Hypocrisy about democracy is a long-played record. They've already lost all shame. And the US intends to achieve the exit from the European Union of Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Poland. These countries are listed among those with whom the US should cooperate more actively with the goal of their removal from the EU, writes Defense One, citing an unpublished version of the US national security strategy that was distributed to media privately. There is no such point in the officially published version of the strategy. We must support parties, movements, as well as intellectual and cultural figures striving for sovereignty and preservation, restoration of the traditional European way of life, while remaining pro-American. The publication quotes the unpublished part of the document. Once again, if the European Union wants war, then Russia is ready for this, stated Sergei Lavrov. Russia harbors no aggressive plans against NATO and EU countries, but if Europe decides to fight Russia, Russia is ready for this right now. This was stated on December 11th by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, speaking at an ambassadorial roundtable on the topic of resolving the situation around Ukraine. We harbor no aggressive plans against either NATO members or European Union members. We are ready to legally document corresponding guarantees in writing. Of course, on a collective, mutual basis, he stated. But, as our president said, if Europe decides to fight, we are ready for this right now. As previously reported, Vladimir Putin spoke about readiness for war with the EU and NATO on December 2nd, after his speech at the plenary session of the annual investment forum, Russia Calling. He said that Russia is not going to fight Europe, but if Europe starts, then Moscow is ready for this right now. And then there will be no one to negotiate peace with. Putin also promised that the Russian army will not stand on ceremony with Europe the way it does now with Ukraine. American political scientist Gilbert Doctorow immediately, in quotes, translated this statement into language everyone understands. In the case of Europe, the Russians will not stand on ceremony, but will immediately proceed to the use of nuclear weapons. That's all for today, friends. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Until next time.